This week in Idaho, Trump's back to office order affects INL. Immigration enforcement is seen in northern Idaho and the capital. And speaking of the capital, Idaho lawmakers look to streamline welfare in the state. And Senator Brandon Shippey attempts to completely ban abortion in Idaho. That and so much more. This is the Yokel Idaho Midweek Report, where we give you a quick overview of the news in Idaho for the last week. Hey there, glad to have you back again. I hope you had a wonderful week. I know the weather here in the state has been enjoyable, or not if you don't like the snow. And yes, I am wearing a suit, decided to go a little bit formal. Let me know down in the comments section if you like the new look and I should continue to do it. It was recommended by the editor and a couple other people on the team for me to go with a suit, and I said, why not? I love suits. They look great. They look good. I got plenty of them. Why not try wearing them? Let me know down below if you think it should be a regular mainstay. Speaking of something new and that continues to go very quickly, President Donald Trump's recent executive orders have been flying out of the White House. It makes it very hard to keep up with them. The effects of one of them are being seen with the Idaho National Laboratory, or as a lot of us here in Idaho know it, the INL, which announced the end of remote work for all 6,400 Battelle Energy Alliance employees. The decision, revealed by INL Director John Wagner, complies with federal directive requiring all federal workers to return to in-person work. As for the approach of how this is all going to happen, it's been driven by the Trump administration's mandate requiring hybrid workers to return by June 9th, 2025, while fully remote employees get a little bit more time, have until January 5th of 2026. This shift impacts about 2,350 in virtual and hybrid staff, including about 400 out-of-state workers, as the lab adjusts to the new federal policy. As for how INL is taking this, Wagner emphasized the importance of in-person synergy for long-term success. Basically, getting out of all the gobbledygook, it's better to be in person. Echoing the administration's stance on enhancing government efficiency. We won't get into Doge quite yet. The lab plans to implement the policy gradually to minimize disruption while ensuring compliance with the executive order. As employees prepare for this significant change, INL faces the challenge of accommodating the influx of returning staff, which originally they weren't planning of, and they have to have places to be because they're actually physical people. You just can't put another server in. The lab is assessing available space and exploring options to ensure a smoother transition, particularly in the light of the national push for federal workers to return to their duty stations. And speaking of something else that Donald Trump cares about very deeply, and many that voted for him, immigration enforcement has been the paramount focus under Trump's administration, with significant developments unfolding across Idaho as, those effects are felt across the nation. Particularly up in Kootenai County's jail, it has reported a notable surge in Border Patrol detainers, processing about 33 holds this month alone, with 23 in just 11 days. This increase reflects the administration's commitment to stronger immigration policy, particularly as neighboring states like Washington limit cooperation with federal authorities. And then also coming down to the legislature, simultaneously, Idaho's legislature is taking steps to strengthen election integrity through House Bill 94, introduced by Republican Jaron Crane. As we talked about last week, he's introduced a couple on that. This legislation would require citizenship verification for all registered voters, building upon the state's constitutional amendment that prohibits non-citizens from voting. If you want to go check out some of the other midweek reports, I think we've already talked about that, or you can just comment down below and I'll answer any questions you have on that. The Secretary of State's office would utilize various databases to confirm voter eligibility, removing the unverified individuals until they can provide proper documentation. As for the takeaway with all this, as we are called to ensure justice and order in our communities, through these efforts, Idaho continues to uphold both the rule of law and the integrity of our democratic process. And speaking of something that's a little less democratic, but hey, we're just going to see if we can reform it here. Idaho's welfare system faces significant reforms as lawmakers push for more fiscal oversight and stricter regulation on public assistance programs. The House Health and Welfare Committee has introduced multiple bills aimed at reshaping how benefits are distributed and monitored in the state. A key proposal would streamline fraud investigations by allowing the Idaho Department of Health and Welfare to access state tax information directly, eliminating the need for time-consuming bank record subpoenas where it's got to go through a court and all that fun stuff. This change would lead to more, hopefully, efficient oversight of public funds and faster identification of potential fraud cases in programs like SNAP and Medicaid. And speaking of SNAP, simultaneously, Representative Jordan Redmond has proposed two controversial SNAP reform bills. The first would prohibit the purchase of soda and candy with SNAP benefits, targeting what Redmond calls, quote, junk food epidemic, end quote. The second bill would require photo identification on EBT cards, though this measure comes with a substantial costs, an estimated $738,000 in the initial expenses and $411,418 in annual maintenance. In conclusion, while these reforms have gained support from fiscal conservatives, they also raise some scrutiny, like anything in the legislature. Representative Faye Thompson and Josh Wheeler have raised concerns about government overreach in food choice regulation and financial impact of the implementation of it being a little bit high. Despite these reservations, all proposals are moving forward for a full hearing. Despite these reservations, though, all proposals are moving forward for a full hearing, which means you could go speak on them if you like, wink, potentially making a shift in Idaho's approach to public assistance programs. These changes reflect a broader push nationwide and here in Idaho toward a more stringent oversight of welfare benefits while ensuring the program's integrity for Idaho taxpayers, which that's a good thing, keeping it all accountable. And staying with the Idaho legislature and controversy, Idaho's legislative bill, known as the Idaho Prenatal Equal Protection Act, was introduced by Senator Brandon Shippey, a Republican from New Plymouth, a little further west of the Treasure Valley if you know where that is, on February 6th, aiming to abolish abortion in Idaho entirely by establishing fetal personhood from the moment of fertilization. As for what this bill seeks to do, it seeks to amend Idaho's criminal code to provide equal protections under the law to preborn children, effectively eliminating exemptions for rape and incest from our state's abortion ban, allowing homicide or battery charges for the death of an aborted baby. Now, as you can probably guess, this bill got stuck. The Senate State Affairs Committee voted to introduce the bill on February 7th, which would typically allow it to return for a full hearing. However, committee chairman Senator Jim Guthrie, a Republican from Kamen, announced that the bill would not move forward for a full hearing. Despite the committee's vote to introduce the bill, Senate President Pro Temp Kelly Anton, a Republican from Burley, noted that the majority of the Republican caucus does not support the bill's approach, emphasizing the diversity of views with the pro-life movement. As you can guess, that has brought up some debate about the bill. Supporters, including co-sponsors such as Senator Cole and Christy Zito, as well as Representative Dale Hawkins, argue that it ensures equal protection for all human life, with Senator Shippey, its writer, stating, quote, "A baby conceived in rape is still a human being equal to you and me," end quote. Critics, including Senate Assistant Majority Leader James Rugby, a Democrat from Pocatello, have raised concerns about the bill's implications for victims of rape and incest, including children as young as 12 who would be required to carry pregnancies to term. As for the takeaway with all this, and just a little bit of context, Idaho's GOP added support for fetal personhood, which is what this bill tries to do, to its platform in 2024. However, like most things in the Republican Party, this issue remains divisive even among Republicans, with some lawmakers expressing reservation about the bill's scope and timing. As of the recording of this, Senate Bill 1059, which is the bill he put forward there, remains in legislative limbo. While introduced and referred to the Senate State Affairs Committee, it will not receive a full hearing at this stage, effectively stalling its progress unless more pressure can be pushed to get it out of being drawered. The bill's future remains uncertain, pending further legislative action. If you enjoyed the Midweek Report, do us a favor and hit the like and subscribe button /follow, depending on the platform, on YouTube, Rumble, or Twitter, to help us stay connected with you and reach more folks who love Idaho just like you. Speaking of abortions, and on the other side of the aisle, Idaho's abortion right initiative has hit a little bit of some legal hurdles as organizers challenge the ballot language, which is kind of interesting. It's theirs. But anyway, we'll get into that. Idahoans United for Women and Families filed a lawsuit against the Idaho Supreme Court, seeking revisions to what they claim is a biased and misleading language in the ballot. The group aims to restore abortion rights in Idaho through a 2026 ballot measure. It would establish fundamental rights to contraception, fertility treatment, and abortion before fetal viability, as well as preserve abortion access in medical emergencies after viability. However, organizers take issue with the fiscal impact statement and the ballot's titles, arguing that they contain inaccuracies and prejudicial language. As for this moving forward, the lawsuit is requesting expedited processing, with a filing ruling sought by April 15th. To qualify for the 2026 ballot, the group must gather at least 70,725 signatures by April 30th of 2026. And speaking about another thing that is controversial, renewable power, the winds of debate are blowing through Whitman County as a proposed Harvest Hills wind project is stirring up some controversy. Specifically looking at what the project is, Steelhead America's plans to erect 45 wind turbines west of Kamiak Butte, promising clean energy, tax revenue, and jobs. However, that pesky little word, local opposition is mounting, as we've seen in other parts of the state, with residents concerned about the fiscal impact, property values, and the environmental effects. The county's commissioners have imposed a temporary moratorium until July to review and update zoning rules for wind and energy projects, so giving themselves a little bit of breathing room. A packed public hearing saw residents voicing their opinions on the $300 million development. While Steelhead America touts economic benefits, the Save the Palouse organization has gathered about 3,500 signatures against the project. As this debate rages on, the future of the Palouse landscape hangs in the balance here, with the possibility of state-level approval looming if local permits are denied. There seems to be a general opposition in the state of Idaho against wind and solar, so it's up in the wind. And coming back to the Idaho Senate Bill 1036, introduced by Senator Brandon Shippey, he's on a roll here, proposes a 10-year moratorium on gene therapy products for infectious diseases. The bill, named after Doug Cameron, an Idaho rancher injured by the COVID-19 vaccine, aims to address safety concerns and provide accountability. As for what Senator Shippey's argument is, it emphasizes the need for transparency and caution regarding experimental medical products. The bill that he's put forward specifically targets gene therapy for infectious diseases, excluding treatment for cancer and genetic disorders, so there's a little carve out there. To support this, he has cited data from the CDC's Vaccine Adverse Event Reporting System, or VARERS. Man, the acronym's actually harder in that case. Shippey highlights the alarming number of reported adverse events, including deaths and disabilities, both nationally and here in Idaho. He argues these figures likely underrepresent the actual impact. As this legislation moves forward, it aims to respond to the growing scientific concerns, with over 3,500 peer-reviewed studies linking gene therapy-based COVID-19 shots to serious side effects. Shippey urges Idahoans to support 1036, emphasizing public safety and medical freedom. And speaking of a controversial bill that is law now and is still having its effects, the Donnelly Public Library, along with a major publishers, authors, and students and parents, has filed a lawsuit against the state of Idaho over House Bill 710. One of these days we'll get away from that bill, but at this moment I have it memorized. Specifically, for those that don't remember, the law, which took effect in July of 2024, requires libraries to restrict access to material deemed, quote, harmful to minors, end quote. The complaint argues that the law violates free speech rights and due process obligations under the U.S. Constitution. It has forced libraries to either remove sexual books or convert to adult-only spaces. In Donnelly's case, the library has chosen to restrict access for anyone under 18 unless accompanied by a parent or guardian, instead of removing the more controversial books the state's trying to get rid of. As for the takeaway on this lawsuit, it challenges the law's definition of sexual content and its distinguishing between different age groups. The plaintiffs included the Big Five publishers and Authors Guild, arguing that the law affects both classic and contemporary literature as well as non-fictional resources. They seek to have the law declared unconstitutional and its enforcement ended. Which, if you didn't know about House Bill 710 or didn't even know this was going up on Donnelly, which is a rather rural area, please don't hesitate to share this episode. Your shares help us spread the word about our beautiful state and help Idahoans be informed and engaged. And staying with the legislature here, Idaho House Republicans have advanced a bill to make death by firing squad the primary execution method in the state. Representative Bruce Scott, the bill's sponsor, argues this method is more humane, quick, and certain than lethal injection. As for the bill itself, it proposes firing squad would be mechanized and automated, so it wouldn't be a bunch of people lining up to shoot, addressing concerns about mental health impacts on staff that had to do that. Supporters claim it would lead to fewer legal challenges and failed execution attempts. While some view this as a step towards justice for victims' families, others see it as a controversial move, like anything in the 21st century. The bill, co-sponsored by 16 Republican lawmakers, has cleared the House committee along party lines. But as for the general takeaway on this one, some oppose capital punishment entirely, while others see it as a means of justice in certain circumstances. If we look at it from a biblical background, the Bible does tell us to punish the guilty and spare the innocent. In light of this, we would argue that the firing squad method is a more efficient way to carry out justice for the most heinous crimes, while potentially reducing prolonged suffering associated with other methods just not being reliable. And then stepping out of the legislature here, but still a little bit tied, Idaho's math education crisis has reached a breaking point, with systemic failures plaguing every grade level. We've talked about this ad nauseum for quite a bit now. The recent NAEP results show that 60% of fourth graders lack grade level math skills here in Idaho, while 31% of eighth graders meet proficiency standards. High school seniors fared even worse, with fewer than 25% demonstrating adequate math competency. Eighth grader scores dropped by 4 points since 2022, equivalent to thousands of students falling behind despite increased education spending. As for the reaction on these results, the state's education bureaucracy faces sharp criticism for doubling down on failed policies rather than performing meaningful reform. Critics argue administrators prioritize self-preservation over solutions, dismissing parental input while demanding more funding, something we have seen a great deal of with a lot of bonds and levies. You may remember that from the last election. State Superintendent Debbie Critchfield recently sparked controversy by publicly questioning parents' abilities to manage education decisions. But moving forward and actually coming up with a solution, there's a couple proposed. The first being universal education savings accounts for school choice, so that we can fund those that are the best performing by the free market. Overhauling teaching training programs, they actually maybe teach a little better, and or installing leadership from outside traditional education circles, so it's not as much of an echo chamber. Advocates stress the need to move beyond funding debates toward structural changes that prioritize student outcomes over the bureaucracy. And speaking of the theme of schools and talking about money as well, Idaho's recent $310.6 million bond sale for public school facilities has raised eyebrows among fiscal conservatives, especially in light of the last one. While proponents argue it is necessary for modernizing schools, critics question the wisdom of increasing state debt when alternative education options are available and a little bit more effective oftentimes. But going a little bit into some context for you here, Idaho offers various schooling choices, including charter schools, magenta schools, and homeschooling, something I have come from. But specifically looking at the bond sale, part of a larger $1 billion initiative, will be repaid using sales tax revenue over 10 years. However, some argue this money could be better spent on expanding school choice programs or providing tax relief to families so they can spend money on the things that work the best in education. As Idaho's education landscape continues to be evolving with much debate, policymakers must carefully consider the long-term financial implications of such large-scale borrowing. With the state's 6% sales tax projected to generate $4 billion by 2023, the question remains, is this the most effective use of taxpayer dollars? And then coming into our third education story, and I think this is our last one here, Idaho's Education Department is preparing for a potential loss of federal funds. Lieutenant Governor Scott Bedke asserts that the state is ready to take on the challenge if President Trump succeeds in eliminating the U.S. Education Department. Bedke emphasized that Idaho can manage education, quote, better, cheaper, and more efficiently, end quote, without federal oversight. Now going into giving a little bit of context here, this comes after Trump has said some things about the education department. While the state currently has received about $351 million in federal education funding, Bedke believes Idaho can adapt and ultimately do it better. He acknowledges that property owners may need to contribute a little bit more to fill the gap, but he sees this as an opportunity for local control and prioritization, where at the end of the day, our education will reflect our culture we have here in Idaho rather than somewhere in DC. The Lieutenant Governor highlighted Idaho's history of fiscal conservatism and pragmatic leadership as key factors in the state's readiness for potential change. As we move forward on this, Bedke also notes that Idaho has long focused on practical education and trades, positioning the state well for economic growth even without federal involvement. He expressed optimism about improved communication between the state and federal governments under Trump's administration, viewing it as a recognition of Idaho's effective governance. Don't want to miss out learning more about Idaho? Make sure to subscribe and follow us on our Substack and YouTube page so you don't miss any of our future midweek reports or our bill breakdowns that break down the bills in the Idaho legislature into simple, easy to understand language. And speaking of our systems here, and one that we talk off and on here on Local Yokel, Idaho's judicial system, dominated by appointed judges, faces growing public scrutiny. And adding a little context to it, the recent lenient sentences for repeat DUI offenders by Judge Pittman and Butchman sparked outrage. Despite appearing on ballots, most judges are basically appointed and run unopposed, creating the perception of unaccountability, or the actual reality of it. As for the issue on this, the appointment process for various judicial positions, including district and magistrate judges, further are obscured from public oversight. Senior judges like Butchman operate without electoral accountability, mainly because they usually get appointed by some committee or whatever else. This system shields judges from public opinion, even when these rulings are controversial. Some would see that as a good thing so they can rule impartially, others would see that as a lack of accountability. Giving an example of that, the judiciary's actions during the COVID-19 pandemic and Chief Justice Bevin's recent demand for a 30% pay raise increase have also intensified the debate over judicial accountability here in Idaho. As public frustration grows, as you can guess there, questions are arising about the balance between judicial independence and public responsiveness in the state's legal system. And going back to Capitol Hill just one more time, if I remember correctly, maybe the last one might be, I can't remember. We had a lot of political ones in this one. Medicaid expansion advocates gathered at Idaho's Capitol, pleading for lawmakers to protect the program. While their intentions may be noble, conservatives worry about the long-term fiscal implications and dependence on government assistance. The state of Idaho has way too much on that in the federal government, but that's a different issue. The rally highlighted emotional stories of uninsured patients, but failed to address the root causes of high healthcare costs. Critics argue that expanding Medicaid would lead to increased taxes and reduce the quality of care. As stewards of taxpayer money, lawmakers must be careful about considering the sustainability of such programs, if they really are helpful or if we can even afford to pay for them, and explore alternative solutions that promote personal responsibility and free market principles in healthcare. And yes, I lied. Here's some more legislative stuff. Idaho's legislature has an ambitious property tax reduction proposal. Looking at it, House Speaker Mike Moyle, a Republican from Star, has introduced bills that would slash taxes by over $400 million this year. His plan includes reducing income tax rates to 5.3% and transferring $100 million to property tax relief funds. While Moyle argues these cuts benefit taxpayers, some legislatures, like any time, are questioning their sustainability. Democrats criticize the plan for favoring wealthy Idahoans, with the top 1% potentially receiving $5,358 in tax cuts. And in conclusion, despite concerns about affordability and impact on state budgets, Moyle remains committed to his tax-cutting agenda, calling it, quote, the largest income tax relief we've ever provided, end quote. And then ending on a little bit of a more positive, slightly dark note, it's just how it kind of worked out, Idahoans overwhelmingly oppose immunity for chemical companies, according to a recent poll conducted by the Embold Research. Looking at that specific survey, which included about 878 Idaho voters, I wish these surveys were larger, small pet peeve, revealed that 90% of Idahoans were against granting chemical companies immunity from lawsuits. I can't believe that was even a question that was being raised. But this opposition comes in the wake of a failed 2024 bill, Senate Bill 1432, proposed by Senator Mark Harris, a Republican, which aimed to reduce chemical companies' liability. Adding some context to it, the Idaho Conservation League presented these findings during a news conference at the Idaho State Capitol last Thursday morning. The poll also showed that 80% of Idahoans were concerned about the Environmental Protection Agency's lack of independent safety studies for new pesticides, like Roundup, despite no similar legislation being proposed in Idaho's 2025 legislative session yet. 8 other states have introduced comparable bills in their sessions that are going on right now. But looking at a takeaway here, the overwhelming opposition to chemical company immunity reflects Idahoans' concerns about public health and safety, with 96% supporting warnings when lawsuits reveal products may cause serious health problems. which that would be good to have a little bit of a heads up if a product has that. There again, I know public perception that then people could try to do lawsuits to manipulate stocks and things, and then it just gets weird. But in any case, besides weird things, I have to go here. Thank you for listening to the entire report. I sincerely hope you found it enjoyable and valuable. If you liked the Midweek Report, make sure to check out our other content. Also, if we missed any important points or provide incorrect information, please feel free to reach out to us via email or on Twitter by tweeting us at @LocalYokelIdaho. With the small team we have, we're not able to cover everything, but we do our best to cover the most interesting and important stories. Thank you for your continued support and assistance. That's all for now. I wish you a fantastic rest of your week. Godspeed.